I know you'll find some really useful tips about all sorts of things over the next 20 minutes. The different types of student loans that you can take out, private, federal, how much student loans do you need, should you work during graduate school, and more. So take a listen to this interview.
Welcome to Genetic Counseling Awareness Channel with Catelyn. All the best resources you'll ever need at Genetic Counseling Awareness Channel.
Hi everyone, it's me, Katie Lee, CGC, and welcome back to my channel for another episode of Wannabe Wednesdays. This content is perfect if you are somebody who is going to be going to grad school in the fall. I know you'll find some really useful tips about all sorts of things over the next 20 minutes. The different types of student loans that you can take out, private, federal, how much student loans do you need, should you work during graduate school, and more. My guest today is Catelyn from the Instagram account DebtFreeGC. I am so excited I found her Instagram account. Go follow her now if you aren't already. It is such a piece of encouragement and inspiration for me as I'm trying to pay down the rest of my student loans and to keep on top of my investing and saving goals. She shares everything. She's incredibly transparent on her Instagram. She shares her salary, her rent, how much student loan she has. Catelyn shared that she accrued over $100,000 in student loan debt between graduate school and undergrad. What's insane is she only graduated 1 year ago and she's already paid off over a third of her student loan debt. So let's cue up this interview. If you'd like to hear some helpful hints from Catelyn of DebtFreeGC, stay tuned. Catelyn, thanks so much for being here with me to talk a little bit about how to budget for graduate school. I was hoping we could start by having you introduce yourself.
I'm a prenatal genetic counselor working in Arizona. I graduated in May of 2020 from the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences genetic counseling program. So I've been working for about a year now.
Okay, great. And the way I found you and heard of you is from your Instagram account, which is DebtFreeGC. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit about what inspired you to start that Instagram account.
Yeah, definitely. And it's something that I've been kind of semi-anonymous on. So friends in the genetic counseling field, they kind of know that it's me, but a lot of people don't. So this is kind of my big reveal to the world.
I love it.
So I started that, I kind of started following the debt-free community on Instagram probably around like fall of 2019. So going to my last semester in grad school, I was purposely looking for just other healthcare professionals and people knowing that I had this huge amount of loans that I wanted to pay off and just didn't want to be overwhelmed by those. And a lot of those numbers were relevant to me, but not always because I couldn't find another genetic counselor on there, which was no surprise there. So I really enjoyed seeing, physician's assistants and speech language pathologists and so on. But again, they just weren't super accurate or applicable to me all the time. And so with that gap, that was when I decided to make my own account in about January of 2020. And it was the idea of just, 6 figures of debt, knowing that we're not making 6 figures right out of grad school could just be really overwhelming. And I know that it can be really isolating because we don't talk about money all the time. And so I wanted to be a resource for applicants, for current students, other genetic counselors, to just not feel so alone and to empower them to talk about money because it is just so taboo to talk about. And I think, we're in this women-dominated field and we feel like we shouldn't have this gender gap, but there's studies out there that it's still there. And so the fact that male genetic counselors are still making more of it than we are, it's just really detrimental and kind of hard to see. And so opening up this Instagram page is helping open that dialogue to really help advocate for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I didn't learn about FIRE until 2019 either. I actually heard about it from a coworker, and we were just talking about her international travels with her child. And I was like, wait, how are you doing that? That's expensive.
Yeah.
And she shared about the podcast Choose FI, which is the first way that I started learning about FIRE, or financial independence, retire early, and just living a more debt-free lifestyle and trying to pay off loans quicker than when they're actually due. So I came to it a little bit later. I graduated in 2015, but I did still have some student debt left, and I still do. So it's something that's applicable, not just when you're starting grad school, not just when you graduate from grad school, but really your whole life, whether you are a high school student, college student, grad student, or beyond. Well, are you comfortable sharing a little bit about the numbers of like how much debt you accrued in undergrad and graduate school and kind of what your plans were for paying off all of that debt?
Yeah, and that's why I started my account as being anonymous because I just wanted to be so transparent. I didn't want, people to see, like, I share my actual salary on there and I share my actual numbers. And so I was a little bit iffy about being public and sharing those. But so I graduated from undergrad. I'd had a scholarship, but still needed money for living expenses and things like that. So I graduated with about 27,000. But that ended up being about closer to 29,000 when my interest capitalized because I wasn't paying off anything while I was in undergrad. And then I worked for about a year before I went to grad school, and I put myself on an income-based payment plan because I was making next to nothing, and so I was paying maybe $100 a month towards my loan. So interest was still getting added on and adding on. And then obviously started graduate school. Those went back into deferment, and I ended up at my max. I had $105,000 in student loans. So roughly a little over 70,000 from just grad school for the 2 years. And it was again right around that big transition period of the second half of my second year was when I was thinking more seriously about, okay, I need to pay these things down. I need to start thinking about this. And so that was when I started paying just a little bit of extra money to try to pay down my interest because I didn't want it to capitalize again. Because it just adds it to the principal essentially. So then you get interest on top of interest. So it makes you spend a lot more money. And I'd already learned that the hard way. I didn't want to do that again the second time around. So I was paying maybe $50 here, $200 there from like January through May. And it took like my refunds and things like that to help get that interest down. Oh God.
It's overwhelming.
Yes, it can be a lot of money. And so, I mean, I was looking at six figures upon graduation and was like, crap, I need to figure this out. I can't just pay $100 a month to be able to live the life I want. I don't want to be in debt for the rest of my life. And so that was what drew me to the debt-free community. And that's what opened my eyes into FIRE. So I started in looking at just wanting to be debt-free and just wanting to have this opportunity where I'm not spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a month on just this debt, but actually opening that up to things like investing that could then allow me to live a life that I don't have to work all the time if I didn't want to.
Exactly. And for me, and I'm going to ask you the same question, for me, prior to grad school graduation, I had just no awareness of like this debt and where it was going to go and what my plan was going to be for paying it off and how that would affect things like buying a house and going on vacations we want to go on and when we could have kids responsibly and all of those things. Like it just was not there and nobody really talked to me about it. So that's, I think, one of our goals with putting this information out there is just to make sure everyone out there has an awareness of really how it can affect your future. And that you have a lot of power, even when you're not making much money, even if you're, at a low income job, to still impact future, what your future expenses and what your future budget could look like and how much money you might have in savings. So for me, I didn't come to FIRE until after I had already graduated, and I accrued about $30,000 in debt from graduate school. I was really fortunate to have my parents pay for pretty much all of my undergrad. I saved $30,000 in my year between undergrad and graduate school, just working my butt off at two different jobs. So that all went towards it. And then my parents contributed a little bit towards graduate school as well. So I only ended up with $30K of debt, but it still felt really burdensome, like a lot. And when you see, oh, if I just keep paying this minimum amount, I'm going to be paying this for 10 years, it's kind of crazy. So tell me what your mindset was, maybe going into undergrad or going into graduate school, and how you thought about debt at that time.
Yeah, in undergrad, I mean, I didn't know anything. I didn't care. I had, I knew I wanted to get a degree, and my mom paid for basically, what wasn't covered by my scholarships and my loan. My mom helped pay for my living expenses and other things like that. So I was very fortunate that I did work. I worked, a decent amount, but it was really for fun money. So I didn't really have a lot of thoughts. But I think one of the best things I ever did, and it wasn't even because of a huge desire or interest in finance, but I took a personal finance class my senior year of
Oh,
college. It was like a final gen ed that I needed to take to graduate, and everyone told me it was a very easy class, no assignments, really this or that, easy to do online. And we had several books we had to read. The first one was The Two Income Trap by Elizabeth Warren, and then another one of her books called All Your Worth. And it talked about just anything and everything under the sun, finance and budgeting. And I loved them. I was like, wow, this is so interesting. This is so fascinating. This is so relevant because I'm about to graduate. Like this is my last semester. And I think that reading those books were the only reason in taking that class that I could even barely keep my head above water when I graduated. But so that was where I was really fortunate, is that I did get a little bit of taste and teaser of personal finance. But when I graduated, I kind of let that, I had a budget that I used based on those skills I learned, but I kind of just put it on the back burner. And like I said, I wanted to spend my money on things that I enjoyed. And so I put my loans on the back burner too. I was only paying $100, and that wasn't even covering my interest. Like, didn't do anything. It was just that I had to make these payments. And so I did, but I didn't really think about them. And then it was starting grad school again that I was like, wow, I'm going to take on even more debt. But I had to go to grad school completely on my own dime. So I didn't have my parents helping me out with those things. And so I was starting grad school knowing I'm living off these loans, and I have to make this work somehow. And I was going from making $30,000 for my year off to making and living on $15,000. So it was such a huge, I wasn't making that much, but I had enough. And then having to go to grad school where I was like, I don't know how I'm going to live on this kind of money. And so again, put them on the back burner for the first year. And like I said, wasn't until ready to graduate that I was like, I seriously don't want to live this life where I just pay the minimums and I'm paying these for 10 years or 20 years, where I feel like I can't buy a house and I can't support children and I can't do the things I want because I've got this huge number just weighing on me.
And it can be so overwhelming. And like, we had a huge medical debt that we accrued from our son when he was born in 2016. And that was even more because emotions were tied to it more than like my grad school debt. Just so overwhelming that you don't even want to look at it. You're just like, let me just throw those minimum payments at it. And I don't care how long I'll be paying it, but I'm just going to just ignore it until it's gone. And what I learned through FIRE and Choose FI is it's actually way less stressful to know what you're working with and to understand it and to have a plan in place. And it completely takes away the stress and anxiety and burden I used to feel about my financial situation when I kind of half knew what was going on. And I was like, well, we'll be fine, but it's probably not great. So I think until you really look into it, it seems scary to look into it. At least it did to me, to really like accept, okay, we have this debt we have to pay off, and it feels like a lot.
Yeah, you just make it out to be something worse than it is. And making a plan is better than just being blind.
So let's talk about that. Hundreds of applicants just found out they are getting into grad school for genetic counseling. And of course, they're coming from all different walks of life and financial situations. Maybe some are coming with undergrad debt, others not. Others are going to be taking out loans for the first time for grad school. Is there 3 or 4 things that somebody can do to prepare in the next couple of months to get ready for grad school and kind of budget and start thinking about how they can be smart?
The biggest thing, and everyone hates the word, but budget. And I don't like to think of it as a restriction or thing you can't do, but it's a plan for your money. Where is your money going every month, and how do you want to be spending it? That is the biggest thing that kept me afloat in grad school when I wasn't working, when I was really living on this fixed income, was knowing, okay, I have this much that goes to bills, and I have that much that goes to this, and I have this much left over that I can go eat out with my classmates or go do something fun or do a trip. So I think a budget is the biggest thing, and people get really overwhelmed with knowing how to even start. And that's what I liked about Elizabeth's All Your Worth book, is it gave you a very basic outline of a budget that anyone could follow without having to do a lot of math. And they call it a 50-30-20 budget. So 50% is going to your needs. So things like rent, utilities, I include my phone even in there, other things like to live on. 30% can either go to debt and savings goals, or you can use it towards your fund money. You can kind of flip those last two numbers around. I would use that 30% as trying to pay down debt or save for things. And then the 20% is fun money. So you can't just have a bare bones budget where you're saying, I'm never going to eat out because I can't afford to, because you're just going to go over your budget and blow that money, because there's going to be times that you want to eat out, times that you're going to want to go to the movies, need to travel. So you can't just say, no, I'll just take out all my fun money and that's that. So those numbers are all pretty flexible. If you say, well, I only spend 30% of my money and my income on my housing and all of my needs, so maybe I can put more towards debt and savings, et cetera, et cetera. But that was a really easy budget for me as a undergrad going into living on my own for the first time, figuring out what should I be spending and where should I be spending that money. And in grad school, I wasn't saving that 30%. I didn't have the opportunity to save, and that's okay, because it's not going to always be a consistent budget every year. If you're in a time where you can't save, you just need to survive, you can take out categories as needed. I think the other big thing is determining how much loans you need, if any. People will normally just take the max and say, cool, great, good to go. But kind of like you said, you had $30,000 saved up. So maybe you didn't need to take out the full amount of loans that were offered to you. I didn't have any savings. I blew all of that on moving across the country. And so I needed all of that to come out. And even still, I ended up graduating and I had about $4,000 left of loan money that I took out that I didn't need. And so I instantly paid that back upon graduation instead of just holding on to it, because I would have just gotten more interest put on.
And student loans, they're so confusing when I'm looking into it for the first time, and there's private loans, there's different options, and you're also maybe just not sure how much you're going to need. So how do you figure that out, and what type of loans do you want ideally?
Yeah, so the big two options you have on loans are either federal loans, which are backed by the government, and then you have private loans. So those are the loans that you can get from your local bank, a credit union, any online banks, etc. And so there's pros and cons to both. For the federal, again, they're backed by the government, so you get a lot of protections and benefits that you might not get with private loans. So you don't have to pay during graduate school with a federal loan if you don't want to. There are sometimes subsidized loans where the government will pay your interest while you're in grad or in school. I don't think they give those for graduate school. And then obviously what we've seen now with COVID, that payments are actually paused and there's no interest. And those benefits aren't going back to the people who have private loans. But some of the cons is that sometimes that interest level is going to be a little bit higher for that federal backed loan versus a private loan that you might be able to get a better number for, because you might have better credit or things like that. So there's pros and cons to both, but I think if you can, I would take out federal loans because of those protections. And then there's always, if you decide, okay, now I've graduated, 5% is so much on my interest when I know the interest rates are 3% if I were to refinance. So you can consolidate your loans, you can refinance to private, and make those decisions. So you're not stuck in a federal loan if you don't want it, versus if you started with private, you can never get that private loan to go federal.
Yep. And I felt the same way when I looked into it. Like, it just almost always probably makes more sense to get federal loans, or as much as you can in federal loans, before you go on to private, because it is just a lot more, you have a lot more flexibility and protection. What about the amount of money you need for loans? Because that's where I was really confused and I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah, that's the big one of what am I going to live off of? And so one, a budget. If you don't know how much you're going to be making or using every month, then you don't know how much loans you need. And so how to figure out how to make that budget is your school will give you an estimated cost of attendance. So that includes your room and board. It includes transportation cost. It includes like health insurance. Also your tuition is in there. And then talking to current students. So if you're moving to a city you've never been to, maybe your school says, oh, well, rent is going to be on average $1,000, but then you get there and they're like, well, it's $1,000 if you have roommates. So having to have those conversations with current students and ask them, how much do you spend in rent, and how much do you normally spend on groceries, and getting a vague idea from those classmates can help you figure out is the number that your school gives you accurate to what you're actually going to need.
Yeah, because those really are just estimates. And depending on your lifestyle and what's acceptable to you, it is going to differ quite a bit. It potentially could. So it's definitely worth exploring. And I did get a lot of good insight from one of the second year students about what actual cost of living looked like for her, and her situation being someone who was pretty frugal, was okay having a roommate, chose maybe a little bit less of an expensive area to live, and all of those things that can pretty significantly impact cost of living.
Yeah, I mean, and that number isn't going to be appropriate for someone who has a family and 2 kids,
Right.
Versus someone who is fresh out of undergrad and starting school. So, and that's if you're in maybe the non-traditional boat of being an older applicant or already having a family, then maybe asking your program leadership to help you get a better idea if there aren't any students who match that lifestyle too.
And there's nothing wrong with reaching out. I know it can feel a little bit awkward, but people will tell you if they don't want to talk about money, and that's fine. And I think most of the time, second year students or faculty would be more than willing to try and help and address those questions and concerns. So what about working during grad school? What are your thoughts on it? Did you work? How much did you work if you worked?
Yeah, so when I started grad school, I did not want to work at all. I wanted to just focus on my program. I really didn't think I had struggled a little bit with grades in undergrad, and I kind of attributed that a lot to having to work. I worked 2 jobs sometimes in undergrad. So when I moved out for grad school, I was like, nope, I'm not working. I'm not doing it. I'm going to live on these loans and we're going to make it work. That lasted till probably about October or November.
Not long.
I was so stressed out about money. I was an awful person on top of being brand new back in grad school on a schedule and just the rigor of everything. It was awful. I had an awful first time just because I had so much money stress. I felt guilty even spending $5 going to Starbucks to like hang out with classmates and study. And so I was very fortunate to get an on-campus position that paid about $14 an hour when I started. Which is a huge amount given that I was making about 14 with my bachelor degree. And then the state minimum, I think, was closer to like $8 or $9.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, I had a great gig lined up. I worked about 10 hours normally, sometimes up to 17 hours on light weeks. But I really was only able to do that because of just how flexible that position was. If I had cases that got added on last minute, or my classes needed to change days or times for whatever reason, since it was an on-campus job, I was able to just let my boss know, hey, I know I'm supposed to be there Tuesday at 10. I'm going to come Wednesday instead. And they were fine with that. I know other classmates, they worked just weekend jobs. So they just worked on Saturdays or Sundays, and that's how they got most of their money. And so I think that working isn't right for everyone, but I know that not working isn't possible for everyone either. So if you can try, I liked that I was able to kind of get a feel for my program and how much I could work and how much I couldn't work, and what the hours might look like. And then getting a job a couple months in was really beneficial to me, because I got to get that feel. I had that extra free time still that I could start to get to know people and my classmates outside of school as well. But I thought it was doable working with, again, very supportive boss and very flexible opportunities. And it took my stress from here to like 0, because now I had money to do that fun thing I wanted to do. And I could save up a little bit for my summer rotation away and other things like that I needed some extra money for that maybe my loans wouldn't have covered flat out.
Exactly. Yeah, I felt similarly. I was in one way really fortunate that I moved to a new state for my program with my partner, and he was working a full-time job and not going to school. So we had that steady income to rely on. And I also had this built-in roommate, which worked great and reduces the cost of rent. But I still felt really stressed. I felt really guilty. We weren't married or engaged, and I felt like I'm paying a lot less for everything compared to what he's paying. And it wasn't a problem for him, but I still it didn't feel comfortable to me. And I just felt like I needed a job too. Like I felt guilty about buying anything, going out with friends, which just really ruins, I was in my young 20s. I still wanted to have fun and make new friends in a new city. So for me, I needed a job too. And that actually reduced the stress also. And I ended up babysitting. I babysat my whole life. And I think it's an amazing job. If you do like kids, I got paid between 15 and 20 hours a week or $15, $20 an hour, and worked about 15 hours a week. And agree, you need a flexible situation, because I think in any grad program, your schedule is going to change. You're going to have your midterm week and not be able to work as much because you're studying, or a certain case you have to observe or something. So that flexibility is key. And for me, what I loved about my job of babysitting compared to a lot of my classmates is it wasn't on campus and I didn't have to sit any longer. So I got to be up and running around with kids, which was something I enjoy, and be outside and like active. So even though it was work, if it's possible to find a job that you like, I mean, that's what I had. And it felt like the best of both worlds. I was getting paid, which I really needed. And it was a break from grad school that was like completely no stress for that job. And for me, yeah, I thought it was doable. I worked more than I think all of my classmates, but because I liked the job so much, it didn't feel like work. And I think the other big tip would be, if you can get a job where you can study on that job, that's great too, because you're kind of killing two birds with one stone there.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think it's doable, but it's different for everyone. I was worried about my grades too, because I wasn't a great undergrad student and I didn't want to sacrifice my grades or be stressed about that aspect. So you'll just have to feel it out and maybe start slow if you're interested in getting a job, or give yourself some time. And for me, it kind of ebbed and flowed in different semesters too, depending on my rotations and how demanding they were, those specific supervisors, even how much time I would have to put in or be there. So flexibility is key. What else? Any other tips that you think would be useful to share for people getting ready to start grad school this fall?
I think, and I touched on it a little bit, but have some fun money. Like, don't feel that you can't do anything besides study and rotations and things like that. Try to make friends outside of the program. Try to still do your hobbies and the things that you like. Even if that's maybe finding cheaper or freer things because of maybe money being a little bit tight, don't sacrifice those things, because they're the things that are going to make you remember and enjoy. You're not going to remember every night you stayed up till midnight in the library for grad school. You're going to remember the night that you went out to dinner and had a great time with, that new friend you made, or that trip and hike you did at the cool mountain across town. So don't forget that, grad school and studying and becoming a genetic counselor is very important, but also enjoying those 2 years of your life that potentially you're in a new city, in a new state, and really have fun with it.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree. And that's, I think, a common misconception about being debt-free is that you're so frugal that you aren't able to travel, or you aren't able to do a nice dinner here and there and enjoy the luxuries of life every once in a while. And that is not the case at all. It's just that you have a budget that is going to go to that. So you're not overspending on it. You're not stressed out with unanticipated expenses, because you know exactly how much money you're going to account for those types of things.
Yeah, I think of it as like mindful spending and spending on the things that you actually enjoy. So for me, that is eating out and mainly eating out and traveling. But I don't really care about new clothes, and I'm not a big coffee drinker. So spending less on those areas that aren't quite as important to you will allow you to have more money to spend on the things that you do want to spend money on.
Yeah, and I think one other thing I wanted to mention was the idea of lifestyle inflation, which I hadn't heard about until getting into the debt-free movement. And it really resonated with me, with seeing like all of my friends in their 20s progressing to different jobs, some people who are still in school and don't have as much of a budget because you're not bringing in much money at all. But lifestyle inflation is this idea that, as your income increases, you expect more and more things and you spend more and more things. You might lease a car or buy a more expensive car and have a bigger car payment. You might expect to live somewhere nicer or spend more money on travel or clothes or whatever your favorite things might be. And that idea, I definitely can see it happening all around me, depending on kind of the incomes that my different friends make and what city they live in and what their friends are like. And I think if it's just something you can be aware of, if you can live on the budget of somebody who makes even $20,000 less than you, that's $20,000 you can save and invest. So just thinking about that idea really helped me remember, like, I was plenty happy when I made $50,000 less. And we just all kind of have this lifestyle inflation. It just happens if you don't think about it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I remember, every time I talked to my partner about graduating, I was like, I don't want to live like a college student anymore. I don't want to live like a college student anymore. And I think there's a fine line between actually living like a college student and feeling like you have no money versus gradually scaling up to saying, okay, now we can live in a nicer home, and I can buy maybe not all the store brand food all the time because I have a lot more income than I anticipated, but not taking that to the next step of saying, okay, well, I make 70,000 and I'm going to live the lifestyle as if I made 100,000. So I know I certainly elevated my lifestyle upon graduation to now. I mean, I bought a house recently, but I'm not living over my means, and I didn't buy a brand new car. I still drive the same car I drove in undergrad. I'm not flying first class, not that most people are flying anywhere right now, but there are certain things that it's okay to elevate yourself. I lived in a tiny, very scary, unsafe apartment in grad school because that's what I could afford. And I didn't want to do that anymore. And so, again, spending that money mindfully of saying this is going to help with my mindset and my peace of mind, and it's not buying a house that I can't truly afford, is okay. So I don't want people to take that, okay, I have to live on $18,000 for the rest of my life, or you have a child. You're going to have to spend more money on that too. You can't just say, oh, we're going to live as if we're two single people still and the baby will figure it out. So being mindful, yes, of that income and lifestyle inflation and increasing, but also know that you can elevate your life a little bit. And
You deserve it.
Yes, as long as you're still living under your means.
Okay, good. And you shared a couple books. I'm going to link them down below. I shared a podcast I really like, and my favorite book about being debt-free is probably The Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins.
That's my favorite one too.
It's so good. And it's so easy. When you read it, you're like, oh, duh. Like, it's not hard. It's just a really easy read. And I guarantee you, when you read it, you'll feel empowered of like, okay, I know what I need to do now. So I think it's something you can never read it too soon. Go get it from your library for free. Do you have any other resources you want to share?
Yeah, that's my favorite book too. Absolutely love them. There's a handful of Instagram accounts. So the one that got me first into personal finance, and I bought a couple of her courses, was called Her First 100K. And then if you want something a little bit more fire related, Millennial Money Honey or Blonde, Broke, and Bougie are both really great resources. And then another podcast, I like The Mad Fientist as well.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Okay. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being on today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was fantastic talking with you.
All right, guys, thank you so much for watching this interview. Please like and subscribe to this channel. Go follow DebtFreeGC on Instagram and scroll down to the description if you'd like to check out any of the resources that Catelyn or that I shared during the video. I highly encourage you to tune in next week for Wannabe Wednesdays, because next week, Catelyn and I are talking about how to pay off student loan debt faster. And if you're somebody who is about to graduate or you just graduated and, oh, that first payment is coming due soon and you would like to get that debt paid off sooner than the 10-year, 15-year terms that you have, then you will definitely want to check out that interview. All right, bye guys.